I recently saw a question on Facebook asking what foreigners were interested in finding out about jobs in Germany, and one answer option that many were interested in was the work ethic in Germany. So let's look beyond laws and regulations and see how people work in Germany.
Welcome to YD. Why do Germans do things the way they do?
Of course, attitudes to work are not the same in every company and in every region, just as every person is different. But some things do apply across the board. For example, it was the attitude to work and how people treat each other that Walmart got wrong when they tried to gain a foothold in the German market a few decades ago. Let's imagine a good German company. You wouldn't want to work for a bad one anyway. Firstly, cooperation is characterized by knowledge and trust. The company trusts that it has hired the right employee and that employees trust that they have chosen the right employer. If you change employers every year on your CV, future employers will have little confidence in you because obviously this employee disappears at the first problem. It's no longer the case that you do your apprenticeship in a company and work there until you retire. But in recently met the manager of a clinic who started there 26 years ago as a physiotherapist. You can still have a career in the same company after an apprenticeship if you want. Even while working, you trust that the employee knows what he or she is doing. After all, the company has hired this person with the right skills. No matter where I completed my apprenticeship in Germany, every electrician or plumber knows how to carry out standard tasks correctly. This is where the knowledge comes in. I can employ a trained journeyman directly. I might explain to him how to use the software for the customer's invoice after work, but I don't have to tell him anything technical. He has learned it. And this knowledge starts with the application. If the company is looking for a journeyman baker, male, female, diverse, then the person must be journeyman baker, perhaps a journeyman confectioner. A trained chef is the wrong place, and if I haven't learned anything in this area, I'm just wasting my time and theirs. Just because I've baked bread at home doesn't mean I'm a journeyman baker. If you still want to apply there, you can do so on your own initiative, but not for this position. If you do it anyway, don't be surprised if you don't even get a reply. So I'll look to see if my skills match the position. Anyone can become a kitchen assistant, but a chef has learned the trade. Of course, I should show what I can do and write that in my application or CV, but the Germans don't exaggerate, rather the other way round. They don't like show offs. If someone can speak English at school, then they will write down their English skills, perhaps describe them as good, but not as very good unless a person has just left school and has a very good grade. Above all, the vocabulary I use at school or on holiday is different from the vocabulary I use when I suddenly have to sell technical machines or deal with legal matters. My school English may be enough to communicate as a warehouse assistant, but when it comes to recording medical tests and their results in a laboratory, it can be a bit tight. It's better to pile a little deeper and then surprise the HR department in the interview with how good my English skills are. Future colleagues from the specialist department or the future line manager are often present at such interviews and ask specialized questions. If you claim you know a lot about an area, but you can hardly answer any of the specialized questions, then it's probably not going to work. But we made it. The company hired us. In the first few days, sometimes weeks, depending on how complex the task is, the new employee is familiarized with the job. This also shows whether the new employee will make an effort and not throw in the towel at the first problem, which is what the probationary period is for. Then they should be able to work independently. The first thing to do here is to trust that the person will be able to do this. And if there are any questions, then ask. There are always times when something happens that is very unusual and rarely occurs, then you ask either colleagues or superiors. Here too, the answer should be honest, whether to the colleagues or the customer. There are some things you don't know and need to check first. If your online manager is not available at such a time, you can also ask the next most senior person or another line manager. If you can't get an answer at the moment, wait with these points if you can, and if you can't, do it as best as you can now. As soon as it's possible, the information is passed on so that the correct action can be taken as quickly as possible. Trust also goes in the other direction. As an employee, I trust the company to know what it is doing. The company will register me for Social Security and pay my taxes. It will pay me my salary on time and also knows the regulations. If a regulation is not adhered to, I will raise the issue with my line manager or the HR department. At this point, it should be said that it is absolutely never the case that after the bank transfer of wages or salary, there is another settlement and you have to pay something back in cash. This is fraud on the part of the employer. If there is actually an error in the statement, this is normally offset against the next statement. Transferring money officially and then claiming it back in cash or paying it out in cash, or as we say, in the black, is criminal. Reporting this to the authorities, the Trade Supervisory Office, Customs, or the Tax Office works wonders. Mistakes can happen. The company realized that it is also possible that a mistake was made in the HR department and the salary was not calculated correctly or the hours were not counted correctly. It can also be that a salesperson has typed the wrong price in the till or a parcel has been sent incorrectly. It is important that the errors are rectified as quickly as possible and that this one mistake is not made a second time by the same employee. Airlines are a good example of this. In recent years, at least in Western airlines, there has been good cooperation between the flight crew, from the pilot to the co-pilot to the cabin crew, who communicate informally on first name basis so that even the young stewardess dares to report an error to the captain and does not conceal it out of fear that they are all flying through the air in the same metal box. In various factories, too, a mistake is often taken as an opportunity to talk about the mistake and the causes, and there may even be training on the subject without the person who initially made the mistake being pilloried. So, if a mistake has happened, pass it on directly. Work-life balance. The law stipulates that employees have predictable time off. This means that it must be known several days in advance when someone will be working. Exactly how long in advance varies depending on the industry or the collective labor agreement. Sometimes there's a fixed number of weeks in the contract, sometimes there's even an annual work schedule in which all shifts and holidays have already been determined at the beginning of the year. Without a collective agreement, a rota should be published at least half of the time in advance over a certain period. In other words, a rota for an entire month should be finalized at least 2 weeks in advance. Even in the special case of work on call, Arbeit auf Abruf, the employee must be informed at least 4 days in advance whether he or she is required. Of course, there are always exceptions, as both good employees and good employers understand. If an employee falls ill, he or she cannot work. If the employer then needs a replacement, they look at the employees who would be available. Often such short-term deployment is additionally rewarded. If an employee is on holiday, then he is not available. I mentioned here that If it is so bad that an employee has to return from holiday, then the employer must also bear all additional costs for the employee, such as an additional return flight. It is the same if you typically work 8 hours a day, but certain tasks still needs to be completed urgently or sensible. If the oven needs another 20 minutes, I can't leave before then just because my time is up, otherwise the bread won't turn out. If a customer calls 10 minutes before closing time and it's an urgent problem, then you take the time to deal with it, unless it can wait, in which case you make an appointment for tomorrow. Conversely, if everything is done, even the dishwasher in the office has been emptied, the copy machine cleaned, and all the emails written, and there's nothing useful you can do in the last 50 minutes, then you can often go home a little earlier. Not, of course, if you have to hand over to the next shift or if customers might come in. Of course, you also ask if you have nothing more to do. Again, ask your line manager, and if they are not available, ask a colleague maybe to help them. Oh, yes, putting your own dish in the dishwasher or emptying the finished dishwasher is something everyone should do. If you're too busy to do it yourself, or always have an important thing to do, your colleagues will quickly put you down. If there's nothing more to do, everything is clean and tidy, but you still can't leave, then you should get some further training. Maybe there are instructions on regulations that you haven't read yet, or you can check how to make certain settings on the test environment of a computer system. A few years ago, in a very hot summer, when it got really warm, even in the office under the roof, my boss said, "That's enough for today. He's now going swimming with his son, and we should do something with our families." When it's time to close a deal with a customer, finalize a project, or cover the roof before it rains, we sometimes have to work overtime. Even a good employee understands that. However, if there is simply a lack of staff and everyone else has to work more because of this, then this is not understood over a longer period of time. Then the employer should know that they need more staff, perhaps bring in temporary staff for a while, or simply accept fewer orders. You work while you work. That should be clear. Depending on what you're doing, you can, of course, have a chat. If you're doing relatively standardized work on the production line, putting together a roof truss or laying paving in the garden or planting trees, you can often talk to your colleagues about the German football leagues, the concert at the weekend, or children, which probably doesn't interfere with your work. However, if I have to write text, make phone calls to customers, or do other work where I have to concentrate on the task in hand, then chatting to colleagues is a distraction. They might be in the corridor on the way to the coffee machine. The smartphone, which keeps us in touch with the world, should also not be nearby. Of course, there are parents who have it with them because their child or the school may call because something happened. Here, too, it should be clear that in an emergency, family is more important than work. Every now and then, the husband runs out of the work in panic because his wife has gone into labor. Of course, if this husband is a pilot over the Atlantic or a policeman on patrol, then he will probably finish his job first and come back later. But text messaging while at work and neglecting your work is a very bad idea, both for the employer and your colleagues. You have to decide yourself whether you are confident enough to speak to your colleague about this, or whether you would rather tell the works council or, if necessary, your line manager, or keep quiet altogether. If, on the other hand, you take a break, whether it's a typical lunch break, which must, of course, be at least 30 minutes long, so that you comply with all the statutory break times, or you clock out to take a 50-minute breakfast break, then you are generally allowed to chat or text message as much as you like. The question of whether you stay in the company or go for a walk in the park or to a nearby restaurant is usually left up to you. It also varies depending on the type of work. If you work in shifts, you have to turn up on time to relieve the others. If you have flex time in the office, you have more freedom. You just have to be on time for appointment with others. However, colleagues are happy if you turn up reliably. So, if your colleagues always comes in around 8:30 on Monday to Thursday after taking the children to school and always comes in at 7 on Friday when his wife does because he finishes work earlier, then that's good for everyone because you can adjust to it. After work is after work. When you leave the company, usually as soon as you shut down your computer or take off your working clothes, you are no longer bothered with tasks. Depending on what you do, you can write down a brainwave at night or it's a weekend, but you work during work times. My line manager doesn't have my phone number or know where I live. Only HR department does. And unless it's an urgent shift, as mentioned above, nobody calls me. For on-call shifts, when someone from IT is also available during the night shift, or when a plumber has to be available at the weekend for customer emergencies, there are corresponding rules and additional remunerations. And one thing that is typically German, well, maybe the same elsewhere, is that there is an expectation that you can do more with more experience, and the pay usually goes up as a result. It's often not about doing something for 8 hours, but about presenting results at the end of 8 hours, and the more experienced, the more results. And in Germany, the results should be as error-free as possible because German customers are very fuzzy. Sometimes it's better for a function not to be there than for it to have errors. Nevertheless, you are paid for 8 hours you work and a possible piecework wage or bonus is added on top. In addition to good training, there is also the experience which should be shared, if possible, so that everyone can achieve more. Helping is also important here. If colleagues have questions, you should help them. A company where everyone is so busy that they don't have time to answer a colleague's question has a problem. Of course, the person asking the question should memorize the answer and not ask the same question over and over again. If you realize that a colleague is deliberately being stupid in order to avoid having to do a job themselves, then that's not a good move either and also goes down very badly with colleagues. To summarize, we can say that employees and employers are aware of their rights and obligations. The employer says what has to be done and when, and knows which employees he has hired for this task. This is also stated in the job description that every employee should receive from the employer. The employee knows what they can do and what they have been hired for. They also know that there will be times with more work and times with less work. First the work, then the pleasure. In fact, many friendships and even couples are formed at work because people spend 8 hours a day together there. But even if you don't want to be friends, you need to work well together professionally. If it doesn't work out personally, you should also tell your employer, then perhaps one of the two people will be transferred so that everyone can work properly and focused again. In Germany, however, work is rarely seen as a family. Work is done for living, but life takes place outside of work. Some have found fulfillment in their work, the majority likes their work, but also have enough other things they like to do. The family might be waiting at home or the club. Because when work has finished, you turn your attention to other things. This is precisely why the Work Hours Act stipulates a rest break of 11 hours between two working days so that you can completely disconnect after work and not just answer a few emails or messages or log in again. Responsible employers also ensure that this rest period is observed. In Germany, you work as hard as you can and constantly improve yourself, which is encouraged by a good employer. It's up to you whether you want to move up and take on a management position or not. And where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? Answers, remarks, additions, and comments in the comments. Thank you for your attention. See you in the next video.